welcome back to my channel. It feels good to be here again, and if you are visiting this channel for the first time, you are also highly welcome. In this lecture, we'll be looking at the arterial supply and also the venous drainage of the scalp. I've done a part 1 lecture on the scalp where I discussed the different layers of the scalp. If you've not checked that lecture up, please kindly go and do so. But for this lecture, we'll be focusing on the arterial supply and also the venous drainage of the scalp. So write down with me as I unfold the different arterial branches that give supply to the scalp and also the different venous branches that help to drain the scalp. The scalp is richly vascularized, and of course there's a pattern onto which the different branches that are seen to supply the scalp are arranged. If you look at this image up here, we know that the scalp is seen to extend anteriorly from the supraorbital margin down to the superior nuchal line. So taking this configuration as a landmark, if you try to divide the scalp along the median plane, having a right side and a left side, you see that there are branches that are seen to supply the anterior part of the right side and also the posterior part of the right side. And as you have this configuration here, so also you have on the other side, there's a specific part through which these vessels run and are sent to supply the different regions of the scalp. So they are richly vascularized, and of course they are seen to be arranged in specific pattern. This of course will unfold as we go through with this lecture. If you look at this image at the center here, if you look at this region here marked in black, this is where we have the scalp. We know that the scalp is a soft layered structure that is seen to be overlining the skull. So if you look at the inferior part here, is where we have this bony configuration that is referred to as the skull. And of course, overlying it above is where we have the scalp. So we'll be driving into the arterial supply of this specific region, which of course we've said that it is a richly vascularized structure. So in trying to study the blood supply of the scalp, it is good for us to divide the blood supply of the scalp into 2 sub-regions. There is an initial subdivisions of the arterial supply of the scalp, and the first one we have is branches from the internal carotid artery. So if you look at the internal carotid artery, we know that the internal carotid artery is a branch from the common carotid. This internal carotid artery is seen to give off 2 branches. So it is just 2 branches from the internal carotid artery seen to supply the scalp. And of course, using this image up here, we already established that dividing it into 2 along the median plane, we have one on the right side and we have another region on the left side. So if you look at this configuration here, on the anterior aspect is where we have the branches of the internal carotid artery supplying the scalp. So we have branches here running through this pattern as marked in this region, and you see that they are seen to supply the anterior region of the scalp. And as we have this configuration on this side, so also we have the configuration here on the other side. And this means that the branches from the internal carotid are seen to pass through the anterior region of the scalp, and that is why they are seen to supply the anterior region of the scalp. Then the second branch is branches from the external carotid artery. And this artery is seen to give off 3 branches. So 3 branches from the external carotid artery are seen to pass along the posterior region of the scalp, and that is why they are sent to supply the posterior region of the scalp. So also using this image up here, we have 3 branches from the external carotid running in this pattern, and of course supplying the posterior region of the scalp. This is just a one-sided view. This means that this configuration will also be seen on the other side. So we have 2 branches from the internal carotid, but supplying the anterior region of the scalp. And we have 3 branches from the external carotid artery, but this is only giving supply to the posterior region of the scalp. And as we have here, so also we have on the other side. You can see that the different branches from both the internal carotid and the external carotid are already taking their space in the scalp, where they are seen to supply the different regions of the scalp. So let's drive in further to see the different branches that emerge from the internal and the external carotid artery, and also the specific regions of the scalp that they are seen to supply. So first, going to the internal carotid artery. The internal carotid artery, we already said that is a branch from the common carotid artery. And the common carotid artery is a branch from the arc of aorta on the left side, while on the right side is a branch from the brachiocephalic trunk. And we know that the brachiocephalic trunk, of course, emerges from the arc of aorta. So going further on the specific branch of the internal carotid artery that gives supply to the anterior region of the scalp, we know that the internal carotid artery is destined to pass into the neurocranium, where it will be supplying tissues that are located within the cranial cavity, and that is basically the brain tissue. So as it enters through, it gives off a number of branches. One of the branches that the internal carotid artery gives off is the ophthalmic artery. So we have the ophthalmic artery giving off two branches that finally supplies the anterior region of the scalp. So this is where we have the common carotid artery here highlighted in yellow. From the common carotid, we have the external carotid artery, and we have the internal carotid artery. So it is from this internal carotid artery that we have the emergence of the ophthalmic, that is also highlighted here in yellow. And we say the ophthalmic artery here because it's within the neurocranium. And of course, it will now be giving branches to supply the anterior region of the scalp, which is on the outside. This means that the ophthalmic artery will need to find its way out of the neurocranium, where it will be exiting it and of course coming out to supply the anterior side of the scalp. And this is the path through which the ophthalmic artery would run. We have the optic foramen that is located around the apex of the bony orbit. I've also done a lecture on the bony orbit. If you've not checked that lecture out, please kindly go and do so, where you would be able to understand the configuration of the bony orbit, where we have the apex being placed posterior medially. So this is where we have the apex of the bony orbit. And of course, on the outside is where we have the base. So from the apex of the bony orbit, we have a foramen that is positioned around the apex of the bony orbit, and this is called the optic foramen. So it is through this that the ophthalmic artery will pass and enter into the orbit. From the orbit, it will find its way out, where it will be giving off two branches. So we have the supratrochlear artery, which is highlighted here in red, and we have the supraorbital artery, which is highlighted here in green. So these two arteries are branches from the ophthalmic artery. But going specifically on the supratrochlear, you see that as it emerges around the medial side. Remember, we tried to divide the scalp in our previous slide along the median plane into two halves, where we have the right side and the left side. On one side of the scalp, the anterior medial region, which is of course the region in the anterior side, but of course close to the median plane, is being supplied by the supratrochlear artery. And this is what is highlighted here in red. So if we go more lateral to the supratrochlear, we have the emergence of the supraorbital. And the supraorbital, because it's on the lateral side, it will definitely be supplying the anterior lateral region of the scalp. And you see it going up, extending to the vertex of the skull. And you know that the vertex is the highest level of the skull. And this is what is highlighted here in this image. So you have two branches from the ophthalmic. The ophthalmic, of course, is a branch of the internal carotid artery. And these two branches are the supratrochlear and also the supraorbital, supply the different regions of the anterior part of the scalp. So you have the supratrochlear supplying the anterior medial region, while you have the supraorbital supplying the anterior lateral region of the scalp. So you see that at the end, we have two branches from the internal carotid artery supplying the anterior region of the scalp. Then going to the external carotid artery. Remember in our previous slide, when we started this lecture, we said that the external carotid artery will be giving off three branches to supply the posterior region of the scalp. These three branches are also further subdivided into two. We have one of the branches emerging anterior to the auricle. This is where we have the auricle. This is where we have the hair around the lateral side. So we have a branch of the external carotid artery that is giving off and positioned anterior to the auricle. Then we have two branches emerging from the external carotid artery posterior to the auricle. And summing up these branches, we have a total of three branches. This is where we have the arc of aorta. And of course, we know that from the arc of aorta on the left side, we have the emergence of the common carotid. While on the right side, we have the emergence of the common carotid from the brachiocephalic trunk. And of course, the brachiocephalic trunk will be emerging from the arc of aorta. So this is where we have the common carotid artery highlighted in yellow. So from the common carotid at the level of the fourth cervical vertebra, we have the bifurcation of the common carotid artery. So at this level is where the common carotid will be bifurcating into the internal carotid artery that is highlighted in green and the external carotid artery here that is highlighted in black. So we have the division or the bifurcation of the common carotid artery at the level of the fourth cervical vertebra, or the upper border of the thyroid cartilage. The thyroid cartilage is one of the laryngeal cartilages. So as we have this division, the external carotid is seen to part, of course, giving off branches to supply structures in the neck, the face, and also the head region. So that is how it goes, giving off a number of branches. But one of the branches is seen to part anterior to the auricle, while two is seen to part posterior to the auricle. And these three branches are the three branches that are seen to supply the scalp. So we have the emergence of the superficial temporal artery. So this is where we have the emergence of the superficial temporal artery highlighted in red. The superficial temporal artery is the branch of the external carotid artery that is seen to part anterior to the auricle. This is where we have the placement or the position of the auricle, and you see it emerging from the external carotid artery, and of course being driven anterior to the auricle. It runs along the temporal region where it finally reaches the scalp region and giving off frontal and parietal branches. These frontal and parietal branches are seen to supply the region of the scalp on the lateral side. So on the lateral side, at the anterior part of the auricle, you see branches from the superficial temporal artery giving off to supply this region. Then if you look at it at the posterior part of the auricle, we have two branches. One of the branches is the posterior auricular artery. This is the posterior auricular artery here that is highlighted in yellow. You see it is located behind the auricle. And this can also be used to justify the name of this artery, the posterior auricular artery. And you see it parting behind the auricle, and of course, supplying the lateral scalp region that is seen above and behind the auricle. Then the last branch is the occipital artery. The occipital artery is also a branch of the external carotid artery that is highlighted in purple. And you see that this occipital artery, after emerging from the external carotid, you see it parting posteriorly, where it supplies the posterior region of the scalp. You can see that on the posterior region of the scalp, we have three branches from the external carotid artery. And as you have this presentation on this side, so also you have on the other side. So you see that the different branches already have specific regions on the scalp where they are supplying with oxygen and also nutrients. So it's good for us to note that we described previously that the external carotid artery gives off a number of branches. If you check up my lecture on the external carotid artery, you see that the external carotid artery gives off a number of branches. But if you look at the branches that emerge that are seen to supply the scalp, you see that these are ascending branches. These branches will emerge from the external carotid, and you see them ascending up so as to be able to attain or reach the position of where the scalp is located, where they will also be giving off branches to supply the scalp. So you see that there's a pattern of movement of these arteries as they emerge from the external carotid artery. They actually seem to ascend up, and it's good for us to note this. So let's look at the arterial branches that we described in our previous slide, their relationship with the connective tissue that they are embedded in. When we tried to describe the scalp in our previous part 1 lecture on the scalp, we described the connective tissue layer that is made up of dense connective tissue. This is the second layer of the scalp. And we described that in this layer, we have a number of vessels. And if you look at the configuration or the relationship between these vessels and also the connective tissue layer, you see that there is a specific pattern by which they are connected. So there is a close adherence between the vessels and also the fibers of the connective tissue. Let's say this is the configuration of the vessels. So you have the fibers of the connective tissue being closely attached to the wall of the vessels. And what this means is that when there is a cut, the vasospasm or vasoconstriction that is supposed to occur within the wall of these vessels, that is supposed to be allowing or enhancing the contraction of the wall of the vessels so that there will be the prevention of loss of blood. Because if laceration occur at this point that is highlighted here in black, maybe there is a cut at this region, the contraction that is supposed to occur in helping to reduce the outflow of blood will not be able to occur. And this is why scalp wound may bleed profusely, because of the relationship that is created between the blood vessels and also the dense network of connective tissue that is embedded within the region where we have the location of the vessels. So it's good for us to be able to establish this and also helping to relate it or justify the reason where scalp wound may bleed profusely. Also looking at the connection between the branches of arteries that are seen to supply blood to the scalp on one side and also on the other side. There is the creation of an extensive anastomosis between branches on one side and also on the other side. Remember in our previous slide, we tried to explain by first dividing the scalp into two halves along the median plane so that we have branches from one side in the anterior side, which is branches from the internal carotid artery, and we have branches from the external carotid artery supplying the posterior region. We see as we have on this side, we also have on the other side. And this is the configuration or the pattern by which they exist. If you look at this region here in the anterior part, we have two branches from the internal carotid artery that is highlighted here in green, and we have three branches from the external carotid artery here that is highlighted in black. And you see that these different branches are positioned around the different regions of the scalp on one side. We say that as we have this presentation, we also have on the other side. So there is a creation of an extensive anastomosis between branches from one side and also branches from the other side. So if you look at it, we have direct anastomosis created between branches on this side and also on the other side. And this is where we have the supratrochlear artery. Remember, the supratrochlear artery is a branch of the ophthalmic, which of course branches from the internal carotid artery. So this supratrochlear on this side will be anastomosing with the supratrochlear on the other side. We also have the supraorbital here highlighted in green, also an emergence from the ophthalmic artery. And as it emerges, we see it being directed on the anterior lateral side of the scalp and also extending to the vertex. This artery also is seen to anastomose with the supraorbital artery of the other side. And this is where we have the creation of this anastomosis. Also branches from the external carotid artery, we have the superficial temporal, also forming as an anastomosis with the superficial temporal on the other side. Then we have the posterior auricular also forming anastomosis with the posterior auricular of the other side. Then we have the occipital artery also forming anastomosis with the occipital artery on the other side. So as we have this direct anastomosis, we also have cross anastomosis, which means the anastomosis are also seen to extend from the different arteries on one side with the other side. So apart from direct anastomosis, they also have cross anastomosis. And we know that anastomosis basically they help in creating a backup route for flow of blood, so that when there's blockage or when there's occlusion, there's going to be a redirectional pathway for blood to flow, so that blood will be able to reach the vessels, even though there's a blockage along its path. And this can also be used to explain the reason why scalp wound may also bleed profusely, because when there is extensive anastomosis, it also helps to increase the flow of blood. So now going to the venous drainage. The venous drainage of the scalp can be divided into two. We have the superficial venous drainage and we have the deep venous drainage. This is how the venous drainage of the scalp is being classified. And we'll be taking each of these to see what they entail. So going further on the superficial venous drainage, the superficial venous drainage basically follows the arterial supply of the scalp. Remember in our previous slide, when we tried to describe the arterial supply of the scalp, we say we have two branches from the internal carotid, and by now we should know the two branches from the internal carotid. Of course, there are branches from the ophthalmic artery. Then we have three branches from the external carotid artery. So on each side of the scalp, as we divide it along the median plane, we have these branches in the anterior part, which is from the internal carotid, and posterior part, which is from the external carotid, supplying the scalp on one side. That presentation is also presented on the other side. As we have in the artery, so also we have in the superficial venous drainage of the scalp. So for the superficial venous drainage of the scalp, we should be expecting branches from the supratrochlear vein, because we have the supratrochlear artery also in the arterial supply of the scalp. And this is the supratrochlear vein here highlighted in red. Then we have the supraorbital vein. This is the supraorbital vein here that is highlighted in green. So we see that we have this, of course, emergence even in the arterial supply of the scalp. And so also we have in the venous drainage. So we say that superficial venous drainage of the scalp have a corresponding named arterial supply. And you can see that this is what is being projected here. Then going further, we have the superficial temporal vein. This is superficial temporal vein also highlighted in red. Then we have the posterior auricular vein. This is what is highlighted here in purple. Then we have the occipital vein, which is highlighted here in yellow. So you see that these are corresponding named vein for the arteries that we highlighted in our previous slide. So this is for the superficial venous drainage of the scalp. So they have a corresponding name. And as we have this presentation on this side, so also we have on the other side. The anterior part of the scalp on this side is drained by the supratrochlear and the supraorbital veins. Then the posterior region of the scalp on this side is drained by the superficial temporal, the posterior auricular, and also the occipital veins. So this is how this presentation is marked on one side. And of course, we say as we have here, so also we have on the other side. But going further and seeing how this venous blood finally drained out of the scalp, because it's a pattern by which they need to follow before they will finally be drained into the superior vena cava, which will then be collected into the right atrium. So it's good for us to drive deep into this, to see where these specific veins will be drained into. First, starting with the anterior part, where we have the supratrochlear vein and also the supraorbital vein at this side. These two veins will merge to form the angular vein, and this is what is highlighted here in black. So from the angular vein, you see it being drained into the facial vein, which is highlighted here in yellow. So this is where we have the facial vein. Then this will be left at this point to be continued with later. But going to the superficial temporal vein, we have the superficial temporal vein merging with the maxillary vein, and these two veins will join to form the retromandibular vein. This is where we have the retromandibular vein here highlighted in green. The retromandibular vein will give off two branches. We have the anterior branch here at the front highlighted in purple, and we have the posterior branch here at the back here that is highlighted here in brown. So the anterior branch of the retromandibular vein will merge with the facial vein to form the common facial vein. This is highlighted here in black. So the common facial vein will then be released into the internal jugular vein. We have the internal jugular vein then drain into the brachiocephalic vein. From the brachiocephalic vein, we have the superior vena cava. We know that the superior vena cava is the largest vein that helps to drain venous blood from the upper part of the body. And of course, this will merge with the inferior vena cava to be drained into the right atrium, which is the first chamber of the heart where venous blood collected into. Then if you go back to where we have the posterior branch of the retromandibular vein, this posterior branch of the retromandibular vein will unite with the posterior auricular vein. And when it unites with it will be drained into the external jugular vein. From the external jugular vein, we have the subclavian vein. So the external jugular vein will drain into the subclavian vein. The subclavian vein will then be drained into the brachiocephalic vein. And from the brachiocephalic, we have it being collected into the superior vena cava, which we made with the inferior vena cava to be drained into the right atrium. You can see that the different veins already, they are creating a path of movement through which their venous blood will run through and finally be collected into the superior vena cava. For the occipital vein will be drained into the suboccipital plexus. So we have the suboccipital plexus here within the suboccipital triangle, and this will be finally collected into the vertebral vein. From the vertebral vein, the venous blood will be drained into the brachiocephalic vein. And we know that from the brachiocephalic, it will go into the superior vena cava, then the right atrium. So it's good for us to be able to explain how these veins also run in terms of movement before they are finally collected into the superior vena cava, which of course will be drained into the right atrium. So now looking into the deep venous drainage. Remember in our previous slide, we tried to describe the superficial venous drainage, which of course is the corresponding named vein of the arterial supply of the scalp. For the deep venous drainage, this is saying to drain the deep parts, that's the temporal region of the scalp. And this of course will be collected into the pterygoid plexus of vein. So it is drained into the pterygoid venous plexus. And you see it located between the temporalis muscle and also the lateral pterygoid muscle, which is located at the inferior part of the cranium. And this is finally collected and drained into the maxillary vein. And of course, from the maxillary vein, we already know the pattern through which they move. Going through our previous slide, the maxillary vein will unite with the superficial temporal to form the retromandibular, which of course will give off anterior and posterior branches that will merge down and of course be drained along that path. We also have contributions from the emissary veins. If you try to go through my lecture on the scalp, you see that we describe the loose areolar tissue, which is the fourth layer of the scalp. In this layer, we said that we have the emissary veins embedded within the space. And these emissary veins are seen to connect the extracranial veins with the intracranial veins. This is highlighted here in dotted black, where we have the venous network of the scalp down being connected through the emissary vein with the intracranial vein. And this is where we have the loose areolar tissue. Within this space is where we have the emissary veins. So these emissary veins are like the linking veins. You see them connecting or acting as an interface between the extracranial and also the intracranial veins. And these are the emissary veins here, arrowed in green. And what this means is that these emissary veins will be creating or establishing a connection between the venous blood of the scalp and also the intracranial cavity. So we have it connecting the scalp venous system with the dural venous sinuses that are located within the skull. And what this means is that there's going to be a creation of a pathway for the spread of infection. This means that because of this connection point that is created by the emissary vein, there's going to be a potential site through which infection can also move from the extracranial region down to the intracranial region. So it's good for us to be able to relate the configuration that is expressed by the emissary vein to also justify the possible events that may arise from it. Okay, let's check our understanding of this lecture through the following. The first one is to highlight the branches of the external carotid artery that are seen to give supply to the scalp. We know that the branches from the external carotid artery are only limited to the posterior region of the scalp. So it's good for us to be able to highlight these branches as they emerge. Also, the second question is the branches of the internal carotid artery that supply the scalp are branched from. We know that the internal carotid artery, of course, has a number of branches. So specifically, the branch that are seen to supply the region of the scalp are branched from which artery? And the third question is to describe the venous drainage of the scalp. This we have tried to describe in our previous slide. And in trying to describe this, we try also to divide the venous drainage of the scalp into the two subdivisions that it is made up of. And the last question is justify why cords of the scalp may bleed profusely. We've also tried to highlight this during the course of this lecture, and we should be able to justify why this, of course, occur. So thanks for watching this video. Let's meet again.